My name is Cheria, and for a living, I turn workplaces into growth spaces. This podcast is a front row seat into my own personal and professional development as I talk with inspiring people about the growth that takes place at the intersection of work and life. Welcome to Grow There with Cheria. November 2023, I woke up in the morning kind of jolted out of my sleep by an instinct, an idea, an inner voice telling me that it was time to heal my relationship with my voice. You maybe gathered this from previous episodes or you've known this about me. I consider myself a retired singer. I started singing when I was 8 years old, and I sang for almost 20 years professionally. And when I quit singing, I really quit. I kind of just cold turkey stopped singing. And I loved singing for most of my career. And towards the end, things got just a little bit convoluted. And when I quit, singing became kind of painful. And I'd known for a while, I started feeling these hints that when I quit cold turkey, when I kind of shut off my singing voice, I also kind of started hiding. I'd lived this life, I was a recording artist, but I also was on stage with a microphone all the time. And I just kind of quit and started sinking into the background. And I, at some point, started realizing it was time for me, and maybe it wasn't time for me to start singing again necessarily, but it was certainly time for me to pick up the microphone and start using my voice again. And I had some healing to do to be able to really do that and be my authentic self. And I'm going to be honest with you, I'm still on this journey. That's part of the reason why I'm doing this podcast, is to keep putting myself out there. I'm privileged that I get to give keynotes and I facilitate in front of people all the time. And yet I know that there's more. And so I bring this story up because when I think about this guest, the way she uses her voice inspires me to use my voice and invites me to think of what are the other stories that are untold that would be helpful to other people. And I'm really excited for you to hear her and to hear her voice. Virginia Suliman is the Executive Vice President and Chief Information and Digital Officer at Invitation Homes. Before she joined Invitation Homes in 2019, she was the Senior Vice President of Software Engineering at Hilton Worldwide, where she held escalating roles beginning in 1997. So she spent a large portion of her career there. She served on boards, including the Digital Innovation and Advisory Council for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, which is where we had the privilege of meeting. I was leading innovation there at the time. And I'm so excited for you to hear from her because, like I said, she's one of the voices that truly inspires me. So without further ado, it is time to grow there with my friend, Virginia Suliman. Virginia, I'm so happy to be sharing space with you today. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm stoked to be here and couldn't be happier to have a conversation with you.
I was thinking about how it's just such a treat when you go down the path of life and you meet different people and you have these moments where you get to spend time or work together, and then there's lots of moments apart, lots of time apart, and then coming back together for something as special as this, and the conversations that we've had over the last couple of weeks is just it's just so lovely to reconnect with people who you always loved and cared for and respected. So I'm just so joyful that we're having this conversation, and also happy to just be reconnecting with you after all these years.
I couldn't agree more. And actually, it was this podcast that allowed us to reconnect, because when I saw your origin story with Ross, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is where you went and what you've been doing. And it was so powerful and such a great conversation. of course, you couldn't get a better guest,
Oh my
life
gosh.
stories, but I'm just incredibly honored to know, like, to watch your journey and to see
Well,
what you've done and the goodness, the do good you're bringing into the world. So it's cool. It's cool. It's cool to reconnect, but it's cooler to see powerful women, especially being able to achieve their goals. Makes
oh
me
my
happy.
well, it makes me so happy. Thank you so much for saying that. It really means a lot.
Yeah.
Um, well, you know why we're here. And,
Ew.
I'm here listening and gleaning from the incredible stories and wisdom that are coming from folks that are telling me about a time when work and life intersected and how they grew from it. So I'd love to just hand the mic over to you, so to speak, to share with me your story and then we'll dive in.
Yeah, I would love to. So I chose this shirt intentionally today because I'd love to share the story with you of how Be Human started. And Be Human is an umbrella that I operate under and have for a number of years. So I'm going to take us back in time a little bit to 2016. It was around May, early June of 2016, and I had two events that were occurring. Literally, it happened on the same day, and the first was my son was graduating from high school, and the second is my father passed away
Mm,
same day, and I was blessed that a few days my father knew he was dying,
mm,
lived in Florida, I live in Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas, and I was blessed to be able to have a conversation with him a few days earlier. He was, clear enough to talk to me, and I'm the youngest of 9, so I'm daddy's baby girl. That's a
yeah.
whole different podcast being the youngest of 9.
Yeah.
And so very close to my father, and he threatened me within an inch of my life if I left and did not go to my son's graduation, he would be very unhappy and he would haunt me for the rest of my life. So
Mm,
I had to be really present that day. And I told myself, just be present in the moment. Don't sit at your son's graduation and think about your dad and this vice versa. And part of this story that's important, that sort of is a thread that I'll touch on, is at this time my son was dealing with some really difficult mental health struggles,
mm,
and I'm gonna, say this because I think it's really important for your audience to hear. I will not be going into too much detail on that. That's my son's story, and it's his right to tell. And I actually
yeah.
got permission from my son to even reference it today.
Mm,
I think, especially sometimes as parents, we think we own the rights to our children's stories,
mm,
and not. I didn't live through it as him. I only lived through it as me. And
yeah.
so he very wisely, very wise at 27, said, you can tell how it affected you in your story, but don't tell mine. And so I'm
Mm,
honoring that today. Having a child that struggles with mental health is a very difficult thing, and it doesn't leave you. And so, indeed, I flew, I went to graduation. I was worried about my son, how he would handle the day and the stress of the day and all of the emotions of leaving high school, which is exciting but scary.
yeah.
But I needed to get to my dad. So I flew to North Carolina and then to Gainesville, Florida, which is where he lived. The flight was delayed. There was all these challenges. The pilot was amazing. I lost it on the flight and just couldn't
Mm,
stop crying. They held my connecting flight for me, which was lovely.
wow.
I landed in Gainesville. I called my sister, said, "I've landed." That'll be about 10-minute, 15-minute drive, small, airport in town, so it was easy. My sister hung up the phone and announced to the room that Virginia's landed. She'll be here in 10 minutes. My dad passed away in that immediately.
Wow.
And I was angry and I went through all these emotions. My sister gave me the greatest gift. She said, he didn't want you to remember his death. He only wanted you to remember his life. And I'd allowed him to pass before, I got there. And
Yeah.
so that time period of my life was incredibly heavy. Very close to my father, to have him pass, to be a mother of a child that you want to fix it. And
Yeah.
as we have all learned, that's not possible. And I was a senior executive at a very large company. And those two worlds were colliding in ways that I never anticipated. I'll give you an example. I would be sitting in a board meeting, this is maybe a couple weeks, couple months after my father passed. So I'm still mourning him,
Mm.
which that in itself, I don't always think we give people enough runway. You get 3 days off, and it's like, but I'm still mourning.
Yeah.
Um, and so I'm still feeling the heaviness of that loss, and I'm presenting to either, get approval for a big project or ask for millions of dollars or, whatever situation I was dealing with. And I'm having, text from my son that is sort of causing physical reactions in me from a stress perspective. But
Sure.
I'm trying to suppress them as hard as I can in order to look and feel like the company wanted me to look and feel like as a senior executive.
Mm.
All of this was in silence. I couldn't share it with, I didn't, I chose not to share it at that time with anyone.
Mm.
Only I, of course, shared with my husband and he understood, but I, you know, lots of different reasons why wasn't vulnerable in those moments. And I almost became two people. I was almost like a split personality because I'm
Mm.
dealing with something very heavy over text or phone calls, or I have to leave and fly home early. And I'm sort of looking like the, smiley, hey,
Yeah.
this project done. And that continued for a little while. I still to this day, if anyone phone is on vibrate or I have a Apple Watch, I can't handle rapid succession vibrations. It
I
still
know.
triggers a trauma response in me because of that time period and the worry that comes with that.
Yeah.
So if I package all of that up, because this went on for a little while, I eventually became vulnerable and started to share with a few folks what was going on, including shout out Bill, my boss at the time, uh,
Yeah.
was, just tremendous, very experienced, not someone you would think of, an old school engineer. You wouldn't think of them being so connected with me, but he was. And I started to take a step back and say, okay, if I'm going through this,
Mm.
who else on my team is longing for someone to just ask the right question, to be vulnerable enough to share what
Yeah.
might be going on in their life? And I really started paying close attention to that. I really started having different conversations with my direct reports, with the team at large. I started to think about my team as a collection of souls, not
Mm.
resources. I had the privilege of having people, get married, get divorced, lose a loved one,
Yeah.
have a baby. And all of those life events can be overwhelming and difficult and scary. But yet, please come to work and deliver your stuff on time. Now, don't get me wrong. I chose corporate America. I love corporate America. Corporate's my jam.
Mhm.
Decided, anybody who worked there or here where I'm at now made a decision to work for a large company or a public company. So there's obligations to deliver against that effort.
Yeah.
I just started saying the phrase and the words, we just should be a little bit more human. We should just be a little bit more human. And eventually, over time, that became be human, an
Mhm.
umbrella that I, it's just still very passionately live by today and bring it to work and make sure that we are putting things in place and acting as humans. Even in difficult time, you can be human. You can be human
Yeah.
even if you're exiting somebody. Like there's no excuse for not contemplating what another human might be experiencing.
Mm.
Um, and the last part of the story is a really interesting experience I went through. So I left this large company that I worked for and came to where I'm at now for a new opportunity, a great position to be at a more senior level. And I put Be Human on a shelf.
Mm.
And but I had a hole in me. Like,
Mm.
just wasn't settling in. I was trying to, like, recreate things in a different in sort of a different way, and I have a tremendous coach, personal coach, professional coach, that asked me, like, "Why are you holding that back?
Mm.
Did your other company create that?" And I was, "No, no, that's mine." Like, it was
Yeah.
all, just like, then why don't let it stay sort of hostage because you have sensitivities about that. Just reimagine it, but it still be human. And
Yeah.
that was, again, another gift that I received. And that was another small pivot and impact that allowed me to reimagine it here and be able to hopefully touch even more souls and more lives by simply encouraging people to be human and just remember at the end of the day, coming to work at 9 does not magically turn off the rest of
Mm-mm.
life, especially with
Yeah.
technology these days, we're connected everywhere.
Yeah.
In the same token, leaving at 5 does not automatically the work sort of stops. Your brain is still thinking about it, and we should be compassionate about the reality of the world we live in.
Yeah. Oh, there's so many things to say, Virginia. I think I wanna start by publicly thanking your son for allowing you to share your part of his story, um, your story, really. I think that what you're saying when you said that you like to think of us as a collection of souls coming
Mhm.
together for work, I just think that resonates so deeply. I think we often come into the workplace and certain cultures of work actually make you feel like you have to leave that behind. Like you
Yeah,
have to that soulful nature behind, and yet it is that soulful piece we really are that drives innovation, that
mhm.
drives I was just recording a podcast with someone, we were talking about how it is our the more human we are, the better we are at creating better services and products and all of
Absolutely.
the any
Abs
even the best Super Bowl ads we're gonna see soon
Mhm.
are all gonna be because they tug at the most human parts of us. And
100%.
and so if we don't see ourselves as a collection of souls, then what are we doing? No one's winning. And I think the other piece that you said that really stood out to me is there's no excuse for not contemplating. I can't remember how you finished that sentence,
Mhm.
but I was hearing it as no excuse for not contemplating what the human element is
Yeah.
always in the
Oh,
room. So, listening to you share when you're going through so much, when you're actively living in grief, and when you're loving someone who's going through something really challenging, you can't compartmentalize that. You can't actually check that at the door. That is you. That is your life. I'm curious, what was the turning point or the opportunity when you started feeling like you could be a little more vulnerable and you could start sharing? Because I know that it's also tricky, again, when you've got your son's story and your son's life and you wanna protect him as well, but you also have just
yeah.
the human and what you're going through. So I'm
Yeah.
curious what
Yeah,
that
and
for
I
you.
also, I have a beautiful daughter
Mhm.
that was living this in this world with us.
Yeah,
But also trying to create that balance of I need to ensure I'm not giving all of my energy here, and I have to, make
yeah,
sure creating space and also not bringing any heaviness with me to that space. It's not
yeah.
fair. Now, I failed a lot. I did a lot of things
Sure.
wrong. I definitely did some things right, but I did plenty sort of there's no great handbook for that
Control.
experience. So there's the vulnerability, sort of the moment that sticks out to me is a tragic moment, but it's the
Mhm.
truth. And so I'll share it with you. A woman that I worked with very closely, and I love her dearly and still have a relationship with her. Her adult son died by suicide.
Mm.
And of course, I was sad for her and couldn't imagine, but
Mm.
I selfishly was also contemplating how much more scared that made me because
Yeah,
he's an adult that had gotten moved on with his life.
yeah.
And I struggled with the selfishness of it. I struggled with like, why am I should be just worried,
Mhm.
how am I internalizing this? And it allowed me later when she returned to share my story,
Yeah,
and, of course, she received me with open arms and brought me in, and that allowed me to without disclosing too much information, it allowed me to tell certain people in my team that I worked with, like, I've got a family, a serious issue I need to tend to. I have to step out, or I have to fly.
Yeah.
Everything else was sort of under the cover of, like, just not even giving excuses, but like, for had to leave early, or where'd
Yeah.
she go? So I just started sharing that a little bit. And of
Yeah.
course, I was met with tremendous stories, whether it was when my mother died, I mourned for 2 years and people can understand that, or maybe they had a loved one that also struggled with mental health. Again, sort of, but to my daughter, maybe they had a situation where they had 2 children that had different needs, and how they
Mm,
into, and how
yeah.
they that like, all of these reciprocal stories, as we are wont to do as humans, right? We
Yeah.
always tell stories back. And it really started to shift the culture within my organization to not only being able to talk about things, but to also, be able to help more and more of team members. And, it doesn't have to always be morose, right? I mean,
Yeah.
these are 2 heavy topics, mental health and death. But even I'm 52 now. I'm in menopause.
Yeah.
I talk about that openly.
Yeah.
I shared with my direct reports, which the majority are men. Like, I apologize for the last year. This was, year before last. Like, I didn't know how to handle this. I was having to work twice as hard just to do the same thing
Yeah.
because I went through menopause. I'm now getting treatment for. I'm, finding some help. I'm feeling better, more energized. And they were so receptive. They're like, "Oh my
Mhm.
God, we do the same thing," or "my sister," or like, there's even just those things that
Yeah.
we're uncomfortable to talk about. And I'm not sure why, because
Yeah.
every woman's gonna go through menopause, and it's
Every
not
single
fun,
yeah. Yeah.
and I mean, I don't mean to talk about it, like, inappropriately, but
No, yeah.
talking about their surgeries on their knees, and and we sort of shy away from real health related things that actually impact our ability to do things. And so, it's vulnerability, across the board. It's not always doesn't always have to be so heavy and so,
Yeah.
difficult.
Yeah. Again, we don't have to check our humanity at the door. We
Wow.
have to bring it with us. And to your point, that can look like so many different things. And I actually believe, when thinking about company culture and creating psychological safety within an organization, the best way to do that in some ways is to share more of the everyday aspects of life. And I think that was the other, when you said, if I'm going through this,
Mhm.
that question, that prompt of a beginning of a question, if I'm going through this, what are all the other things that all the other people are going through?
Yeah.
And there are so many, and it's not even how we can support one another through
Mhm.
the process, but also what we can be learning from one another when they're
Oh,
willing to share, right? Like I'm 41. I Who knows? I could be in perimenopause. We don't know because, gosh, it's just hard to tell, but I'm watching for symptoms daily. And everyone who's in menopause, I want to talk to you. I
God.
want everything because, whatever we can talk
Yeah,
about
yeah.
system and women and
I do have to say, I was chatting with my husband, and I was telling him about this, and I was like, "Oh, yeah, she's a young woman that I used," and you're young, but I swear to God, I thought you were, like, still in your late 20s or less. So, whatever you're doing, you should talk about that on your podcast. Like, here's the look of Daisy.
that
Um,
is so
is
kind. That is
it
so
yeah.
kind. But no, I'm knocking on menopause's door. I want to talk to everyone about it because, and I feel like I'm so lucky to have so many women who are finally like you, starting
Yeah,
to share, starting
yeah.
to actually say, I mean, I listened to this podcast. I'm going a little off the rails, but I listened to this podcast. It was Diary of a CEO. I forget
Oh,
his,
yeah.
but he had a woman on there who talked about menopause, and she was saying what we don't realize is that menopause is that your brain is changing. It's
Oh,
not,
yeah. I mean,
and
you
that
realize you're in it. It's just like,
right,
well,
that alone, she said, for years women have been saying, I don't feel right in my brain, but like
mhm,
now we have scientific evidence that your brain is changing. And like,
yeah,
why wouldn't we want to be telling people in the workplace, like, my
yes.
brain is changing right now? I know how to, I'm managing what that means, but like there's gonna be some pros and cons to this phase,
Yeah.
you know?
The power, I have learned the power of an apology, a meaningful apology, not a, "I'm so sorry," and you don't mean
Yeah.
it, but a meaningful apology throughout the course of me trying to hold myself accountable to a Be Human atmosphere and organization. There is time, like, I'm from Philly, I can get quick, I can get direct,
Mhm.
and I've had times when, like, big almost all of my team there, and I kinda was really short with a particular woman who I actually highly respected, and we had a break right after, and I was like, "You know what? That didn't feel right." And I didn't just go off to her and say, "Hey, I'm sorry about that." We kicked back off, and I said, "You know, I'm gonna take a moment. I'm gonna, like, I apologize.
Yeah.
I shouldn't have responded that way because if I'm gonna get short publicly in front of everybody, I need to own it publicly."
Yeah.
And the same with the menopause. When I came and met with my team and I said, I'm sorry if
Mm.
I let you down because it hit me hard mentally, like, physically,
Mm.
fine, I didn't have a lot of the issues, but mentally, it was during COVID as well,
Oh,
and so
yeah.
I didn't know what was COVID, what was menopause, like, it was just all I knew is, my brain fires, I am ADD, it is firing all the time, and it was, like, misfiring all over the
Yeah.
place, and just that power of that apology, me asking for grace
Mm.
on, people that I am human too, and being human is not all about being nice or
Yeah.
being, sometimes it means that we need grace because we've made a mistake, and it's
Yeah.
human to allow for that grace. It's human to have mistakes, recognize when people mean it, when they're trying to make good around something that happened. And apologies, meaningful apologies for me have repaired and opened relationships that I would have never thought would sort of blossom in the way that they have.
Mm.
We do it enough in
No.
our especially at work because
Yeah.
we're playing these sort of you can't look weak and you have to show up a certain way. And I mean, I fell trapped to that for a lot of years. And I just am determined that I'm not going to organize myself that way. I'm not going to behave that way.
Mm.
Behave like a
Yeah.
real human being as often as I still
Yeah.
um,
Well, listen, I respect it so much because you're a badass executive professional and you've had an incredible career, and to see women especially modeling the way and being vulnerable but also being strong is so it's such an inspiring thing to see, and it's just needed, as I think about the opportunities where there are opportunities to transform the workplace and the workforce, it those opportunities are gonna come from people modeling a different way of leading vulnerably and a different way of bringing their humanity to work, and then also doing really good work, you know? And
yeah,
when you have that combination, you realize, like, "Oh, this is why this human project is actually so fun." Like, this whole human project of life is so fun when we
yeah,
bring our whole selves and we bring our skills and abilities and we bring our compassion and empathy. That's
yeah,
when we can do really great work.
yeah,
So I love that so much. Obviously, I feel like Be Human, this concept, this ideology, this value that's come from you and that you've now propagated feels like such an important kind of culture driver. But I'm curious, based on your story, from
mhm,
grief, from challenges with your son, with parenting 2 kids with 2 different needs, to
mhm.
menopause, all of it. If you were to sum up a piece of advice for business leaders about how they can make their cultures enriched by your story, what would it be?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would lean on, kind of drawing on something that you said. I would lean on that your own personal life lessons are just as important as the last conference you went to, magazine article
Mm,
read on how to engage with your team. Sometimes we look to these external sources to tell us how to do something, but your own personal learnings. every leader is going through something at home, positive and negative, and they're
Yeah.
picking learnings through those experiences. Let that bleed through. Let that
Mm.
come through to your team. Find the appropriate way to be vulnerable with your team because you'll be teaching them
Yeah.
and helping them think about their experiences. A great example, like after my father passed, some people were already in the club and had already lost a parent. There's a lot, thankfully, who hadn't. But
Yeah.
as others started to come in the club, they remembered my story. They remembered me sharing how I was mourning for a decent amount of time and what that looked like for me.
Yeah.
And so, who would have thought, like, that their boss or their boss's boss, that me telling my story rather than their own family sort of gave them a nugget of information that helped them how to deal with it at work, how to come to work.
Yeah.
And I'm so blessed to have the stories and people take time to share back with me because that makes me learn more. And then I put it back into the system. And so my advice to business executives is to take stock of what you've personally learned and remember that you're leading humans, not robots. They haven't taken over yet. We're all and they need that experience as well, and it will make them better leaders in the future.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and I think that's so empowering what you're saying too is, because I think a lot of people, leaders included, don't realize the power of their own story,
Right.
and how that when they really share that and live into that and let that guide them, that's the thing that kind of packs the biggest punch for them. It's one thing to learn from others, and we should, but whatever that story is that you lived through, that was the story that was meant for you.
100%.
And so there's something important there that only you could have gone through and only you can derive the wisdom that came from it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's really, really valuable. This has been such a lovely time with you. And I want to get into rapid fire questions, but I just want to thank you for always showing up vulnerably and just as your powerful self. You've always done that. When we talked the other day, I was like, "Are you speaking?" Because I love every time I see you on stage giving keynotes, I'm like, "She's a powerhouse." So I hope you start doing a lot more of that.
I
Um,
appreciate that.
yeah,
Someday, we'll get back to it for
yeah.
sure.
Okay. Well, are you ready for some rapid fire?
I'm ready. Hit
Okay.
me.
Fill in the blank. Growth is.
Growth is not linear.
Hmm, yeah. What was the very first thing you realized you were good at as a child?
Mm. Again, youngest of 9, I realized I could manipulate well. I mean, I was the baby.
I
Everybody
love
loved
that
me.
so
I
much.
could do anything I wanted, man.
I
I learned
love that you answered this that way because everyone always answers like, "I was good at sports," or "I was good at so." I actually answered the exact same way. I was the oldest of 2, and I realized
mm,
I was good at manipulating my younger sister. So,
yeah,
like, manipulation, I think that's one of the first skills many kids.
absolutely. Yeah.
What was your very first job?
Oh, good grief. There's a fun story around this. Can I take, like,
Yeah,
a
of course.
minute or 2 minutes? So, my very first job was actually at a grocery store. I was 15 years old. My brother worked in the grocery business, and got me in. Unfortunately, it was an awful experience because I was harassed,
Oh, no.
15 years old.
Ugh.
The manager of the store started to harass me.
Mm,
It didn't go overtly sexual, but it was highly inappropriate for a 15-year-old girl.
yeah.
And he insinuated that I could be head cashier very quickly if I fabricated these. And so I've told this story before and was actually in front of so many people at my former job because it was set up to be that way.
Yeah.
And they said, "Well, what was your second job?" And I was head cashier. Of course, that part's not true, but that was the joke of
I love it.
the story. So it was a very short-lived. So my real first job was at the Great American Cookie Company.
Wow. Okay, that's
Yeah.
good. That's great. Okay, I know this is hard for a lot of people to answer, but who was your best boss?
Um, I think, my the gentleman that I mentioned, Bill Murphy, who was the CIO of Hilton, I didn't report to him very long, but here's why he's so important to me. And I actually wrote this down like last week to find his number and remind him of this.
Yeah.
Two reasons. One, he came at a time in my life and career that there was a lot of people who weren't believing me. They were choosing not to believe difficult facts I was sharing with him. And he came in and he believed me. He trusted my technology knowledge. He trusted
Mm,
what I was sharing with him. He defended me.
mm.
He right-sized my salary.
Yes.
I had grew up there. So whenever you grow up in a place that long, I was at 22 years, you just don't get the same type of salary as if you hop
Yep.
around, and he right-sized that, and then he trusted me I grew up in digital. All I did was digital, and ultimately ended up managing all of software engineering, but he trusted me to put me in a position to teach digital to the rest of the technology organization.
Mm,
And he took risks on me that others would not, and I hope that he would say today, I paid dividends on those risks
mm,
and for the company's benefit. But there's been other great bosses in my life, but that he did so much for me in a short period of time that enabled me to feel publicly how I felt privately. I was
mm.
myself privately. I was proud of what I did, but he put me in a position to sort of be confident in that publicly, and I will forever be indebted to this very old school engineer who trusted this, young digital woman to do things.
Wow. That's so I love what you just said about him. Heck, I'm gonna mess up with the publicly and privately thing. What you felt privately, he amplified publicly, and
Yeah.
I think that's so powerful, and any leaders out there should be thinking about how you can do that for your people. Well, I hope you do find his number so you
I
can
will. I'll send him this link once it's
Yeah,
done.
exactly.
Yeah.
What's something you're trying to learn right now?
I am trying to learn what the next phase of life looks like. So I'm not ready to retire yet, but it's also not that far away in the
Yeah.
grand scheme of things. And so it's scary. I've been working
Mm,
since I was 15. And, that's another thing that we don't sort of talk about is the pressure. It feels like, kind of the equivalency of leaving high school and going to college. It's like, oh my God, this is a whole different world.
yeah.
So doing everything I can to learn not just the ins and outs of like the finances and how do you do this. And obviously I'm married, I have a husband, and he's done well in his career. So that aspect is like we've got that managed. I
Mhm.
need things like, I don't have real hobbies.
Yeah,
I'm learning how to play chess right now. Like,
I
I
love it.
need more of those things in my life. Like, could I play racquetball? I don't know. Like, what else can I do so that I don't retire and then die? And I
Yeah,
mean that seriously, like, that's a real
yeah,
risk. Don't have, I can't just sit in a corner and read. I mean, I'm a raging introvert, so that sounds lovely, but that's not gonna
yeah,
sustain. So that's what
yeah.
I'm meant to learn right now.
I love that. I think that's a great thing for people to consider, starting to think about that before it's gonna happen,
Yeah.
really, really think about it. What's something you're trying to unlearn?
Um, God, that's a really good one. I think I'm trying to unlearn unhealthy habits. I don't know if that makes sense,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
I've always been an athlete. I've always been like I carry weight, but I always had great labs,
yeah.
which which is a bad thing. Like you don't learn early to manage. So I kind of eat what I want and burn off when I needed to, and my labs were okay. Well,
Yeah,
you get older, they don't cooperate quite as much.
sure.
I've got some really bad habits to unlearn and learn new habits, and
Yeah. Hard. It's so hard, it's so hard, but we try, we do our best.
yeah.
Tell me a book or a movie that changed your life.
The Spider and the Starfish is the book that immediately comes to mind. So It is still to this day how I operate. It's a little bit older book, like Napster's a reference to give you a time
Yeah.
book. The book is about how to operate a round table. So the
Mm.
spider has a head. If it loses its head, it dies. The starfish can lose limbs and it will thrive and also can regenerate its life.
Yeah.
And so that's the concept of leadership is round table. And it changed the way that I lead teams, manage teams. And I still follow that today. And it again paid dividends for me. So I know that's a business book, but that
Yeah. I love that.
first thing that came to mind.
I'm going to put that in my cart immediately. Let's see. When growth feels good, how do
Mm.
you celebrate?
Not great at celebrating. Often I'll celebrate. I don't know. You're stumping me on this one because I'm a terrible celebrator.
Well, you're not alone. 15, I feel like at least 50 to 60% of folks answer the question almost just like that. And so I always like to say, well, this is your reminder to work
Yeah.
on that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's better at celebrating others than I am at
Mhm.
myself and my own growth.
Yeah.
I would probably tie it to my previous that I would eat something that was yummy and inappropriate. I'm having dessert.
Listen, sometimes everything in moderation, sometimes it's
Right,
perfect celebration.
right. Yes.
Um, when growth feels hard, how do you
Mm.
take care of yourself?
Largely my partner, my
Mhm.
husband. I mean, he's tremendous. He listens with such interest, even when I know he really doesn't care.
Yeah.
Like he's probably like, "Oh God, this story again." He has always been the person that I can talk through with any sort of difficult situation, and he's great about siding with making me feel good, but also pointing out, like, "Well, have
Mm,
you thought about maybe
mm,
this way, or did you do this?" And he does it in a way that doesn't feel accusatory or
yeah.
difficult, and it allows me to have that bit of that therapy session to, like, get it out and sort of share my frustration, and I'm very much a duck, like, things will water off the duck's back
Yeah.
quickly, very quick.
Yeah.
My daughter's the same, she got that tendency, very quickly we move on.
Yeah. Yeah.
So fortunate in that, but I gotta say, my partner,
That's wonderful.
he's the best.
That's so wonderful to hear. What would your 8-year-old self say about the life you're living today?
My 8-year-old self would not believe at all. I think she would say, "This is, a story or, a movie." She would be very untrusting,
Mm.
real. I grew up very, we had love, we had food, but we were poor.
Yeah.
Youngest of 9, as I said, and lots of tales
Yeah.
or all of that. I'm often asked, like, You should write a book." And I was like, "I have to get every family member's approval, so we're just gonna not do that. I would never write a book without, all of their approvals." And so she would be proud, I'm sure, if she believes it, but I think
Yeah.
the answer is I think I would be very cautious of believing that that could be true. I
Wow.
was always very careful to not dream too far ahead.
Wow.
Yeah, very cautious about I wanted to make a certain amount by the time I was 30, and then maybe I wanted to do something at 40. Like, I was very careful to not say, "I could be a chief information digital officer one day."
Mm.
Ever. Like, that was too a bridge too far, things like that where I
Yeah.
temper
Yeah.
that.
Wow. Wow. Well, last question is, when you grow all the way up and you leave this life, what is it that you'll congratulate yourself on?
Genuinely caring about what happens to people,
Mm. Yeah. That's
like,
really beautiful.
caring about and I would be proud of myself for taking the knockdowns that I took because of that. I mean, I
Mm.
passed over for promotions. I had people who didn't believe in me. I had people criticizing me for being, somehow I was both. I feel like that song that's out right now. Like I was both. You're too direct. And you're too caring. You're too
That's
soft.
really
Like
that's really
you have both. Like
yeah.
pick your thing you hate me the most for. But I'm proud of that. I am proud of those promotions that passed me by. I am proud of the people, sitting in this seat. I hope those people who judged and questioned, and I hope that they just take away from that of, you can do good
Mm.
and do well. It
Yeah.
is possible. In how you do it matters. I didn't always make the right choices, but you don't have to be a monster to be successful. And I'm proud that I took the path that I did and still was able to get here.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Virginia, thank you for being human, for modeling the way, for being a caring, compassionate leader, and for also being someone who cares about their work and does great work and models how to do that as well. You're truly an inspiration. And I'm just so grateful that you sat down to have this conversation with me today. So thank you
Thank you
so,
for asking me. This was a blessing. I appreciate it.
so good. All
Thank you
right.
for
So,
your time. We need
oh,
more. We need more of you for sure. The whole world needs to know you. Like
oh,
just
that's so kind.
your energy is just like the thing I remember about you is I remember just, walking into the place that we shared space in and just immediately being, sort of attracted to your energy and who you were. Like I just wanted to know more and be around you more. You just have that charisma and there's something very special about who you are, especially when you're in the room. It's almost like you just like plumped over to you.
Oh
So
my God.
don't ever dim that magic. Whatever it is, don't ever dim it. We need it.
Thank you so much. That is so kind. I'm trying to be brave in this life. It is not always easy, but I really appreciate that so much. All right,
Amen.
everyone. Well, thanks for listening. We'll see you soon.